Greetings, salutations, and welcome to the Kreeger Cast. I'm your host, Patrick Kreeger, and I'm joined once again by my father, Whit Kreeger.
Howdy.
You always surprise me, Dad. Today we're going to be continuing where we left off the other day on my father's wartime experiences. Last we heard, you were fleeing to Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, that's very true. As a matter of fact, it was my dad that situated us in a town called Zwickau, which was at that time in what we call the Sudetenland. So there were a lot of Germans and a lot of Czechs, and it was the area that was annexed by Hitler and Germany. And it caused that famous incident of Chamberlain.
Oh, yes. Peace in our time.
Yes. So Chamberlain went to negotiate with Hitler, and I think everybody probably knows that story, and he came back, he said, yeah, well, he took over Österreich because, they're Germans, and we'll just let him take over Czechoslovakia, or at least what we call the Sudetenland, because, there are also a lot of Germans, and that'll be the expansion, the end of the expansion of Germany, and we'll have peace. At the time, I think there must have been a lot of people that were hopeful that this would truly happen. And, well, it turned out that there was no peace in our time at that time. But let me get back to Zwickau. I'm not so sure what Zwickau is called today, but imagine a town approximately, I would say, sprawling, perhaps, in my area, something like Upland, California, and maybe not as populated, but houses and streets and really clean. These people were really clean. I do remember that these were still horse and buggy days, so the cars were few and horses were plenty, for carting things around. And the horses would leave their deposits, in the street. And they had a constable coming around, ringing the doorbell, opposite to where that deposit was, and say, take care of that. And that was how cleanliness was kept in the street. They just didn't leave the shit in the street, okay?
Yeah.
So... as good as Herr Krupp thought that horse manure smelled, they didn't put up with it in the in the streets of Zwickau, and probably not in Czechoslovakia anyway. What interesting about the Sudetenland is that those Germans, they were, unlike the Prussians, they were Catholics. Yeah, it's because they were at one time they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so that was all one thing at one time, and the Austrians are Catholic. Predominant. They're kind of like the Bavarians, they're Catholic. Although the Austrians are probably a little bit of an irreverent bunch, who knows what they were, but when the religions were determined for the different areas, right after the 30-year War, which was the War of Reformation, Austria and Bavaria, and the state of Baden were Catholic, okay, of the Germany. And also, I think... there were. I think Westphalia also was Catholic, but Württemberg, our king, the king of Württemberg, who resided in both Stuttgart and Ludwigsburg, he took on the Protestant or the Lutheran religion, and so the people had to either become Lutheran or leave.
Yeah.
And there was not much choice, So these areas they didn't tolerate somebody with a different religion in their midst because, emotions ran really, really tough, and the memories were long of the 30-Year War, which was a really brutal time for Germany, yeah. The Swedes got involved, and I remember, even in Marbach, people were talking about der Schwedentrunk, which is the drink of the Swedes. They would go to the cesspools, and dip out a few ladles and get the people, the farmers, that owned the place to drink it. God, what an awful thing. Anyway, so those things really happened. All of those atrocities, that you read about, the 30-Year War was bad. It just wore the people out, and they made a peace ultimately, and divided up the country that way by religion. Poland was Catholic, except Prussia was the main Protestant country. So Wittenberg was Catholic, and Baden was, but I digress a little bit, because Sudetenland was very nice. Zwickau. So this was like 1944, and I remember that my dad kept sending stuff to us to keep, and so we already had boxes of things, wooden boxes, and I think there were at least 5 wooden crates, or maybe 7, but I think it was 5. And that contained the stuff that they held dear, like, one crate was actually full of cigarettes, okay, because my dad had the foresight that, if the crap really hits the fan badly, money would be worthless, possibly, and people would need things to barter.
Now, question, were these the cigarettes he made, or were these bought cigarettes?
Oh, these were bought cigarettes. Those were prominent names. It would be like having a huge box of, I don't know, maybe the boxes were probably something like 4x4, 4x5. They were big enough.
I was going to say that's huge.
Yeah, they were big enough to where my mom couldn't wrestle them, even though she was responsible for those boxes, So they were stored, I think, mostly in the attic. I don't know how they got up in the attic, but people were helpful, So there were 3 children with my mom, and my dad would visit from time to time before the Russians came. And the time that the Germans were still in charge, that was pretty good for us, actually. We had a nice apartment on the street, and I remember one time, there were Russian prisoners working on the road, and my mom had just gone to the bakery to buy some Brötchen and things of that, that we used to eat, fresh baked stuff. And so there were these Russian prisoners watched over by German soldiers. And so she gave me a bag, and I think it was like a cloth bag of these Brötchen, and which was probably practically everything that she had bought. She gave it to me and said, "Okay, go on over and give it to those people sitting there on the ground." Because at the time, they weren't working, they were resting, and the soldiers were watching over them with guns. So I went there, and the Russians were really, really grateful, okay? And oddly, the Germans, they went and came to look and saw that this was food
Not like tools or weapons or anything.
Yeah, and they were okay. They walked away and let the Russians eat. You know, so I thought that was that almost brings tears to my eyes. You know, but it was it does bring tears to my eyes. It was something that was unforgettable. You know, because it was an act of kindness. You know, that transcended our feelings. We didn't like the Russians. You know, I mean, the Russians were invading our country, right? You know, they'd almost come to Radom at that time, and so this was a bit of a. I think I probably learned something from that. You know, I think maybe it. You know, all of the other most of the experiences, you know, in a war zone or so tend to harden you. If you survive it, you become really tough. Okay, but it takes moments like this, you know, that make you believe in the kindness and the goodness of humanity, and you you know, I mean, if you believe in karma and things of that nature, you know, I have stories to tell you of how strangers later on helped us, you know, in times of need. Anyway, so there were three of us. My brother Heinz, who was I think maybe a year and a half or so younger than I. So I was 4, he was 3, and Walter was just born, because I think he was born in 44. Yeah, so Walter was a baby, so he was just born. So my mom had Walter, Heinz, and me, and so, you know, I said that my dad used to send stuff to us, and one day what he sent to us was my bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a little bicycle, you know, bicycle for a small child, that he was trying to get me to ride. And I know that he ran after me many, many times, and I just never could ride it. And, you know, it just didn't work well, you know, while we were still in Radom. But oddly, and my parents talked about this, and I do have memory of that, is when I saw that bike, I was so excited that I got on that bike immediately and drove that, rode that bike all over the place, you know, right away, instantly. I was comfortable with it. And so, you know, just the bike in itself has a really interesting story, because I just rode that bike everywhere. You know, I went, you know, wherever. Heinz was too little to ride the bike, but I rode it everywhere. And so the Russians, well, maybe I should, Switau is where we actually experienced Russians taking over the town. And, but an interesting part of that story probably is that the people there, and well, actually, you know, many of them were the Russian prisoners that were there. They had to build what they call tank traps, and what it amounted to, you know, imagine a medieval town with you know, sturdy walls around it, and it had an entrance. You know, it had a gate. You know,
yeah,
gatehouse, and all that kind of thing, and so. The main gate into, and there was only one gatehouse, because I think the exit to the other areas were closed off. So there was one. The street came into the town. That's it. You know, and so all the traffic went in and out one area. So they built these tank traps, and what they did is used huge timbers, you know, and rocks, and, you know, the timbers meaning round trees, basically, you know, and rocks and sand, and they built and narrowed that entrance gate to where a tank couldn't get through.
Yeah.
And so, we thought we were kind of impervious to this, but, as time went on, we experienced air raids. And we got really good at knowing whether to take cover immediately or whether you had time to go home. There were 3 different signals, and then there was one was take cover immediately, and a warn. Well, first you would have a warning. There was a warning signal. It was the same siren, but it had different modes of. It was the same tone, but it had different cadence. For so you would know. So first there was a warning, and that warning would tell you, maybe you ought to head home or figure out, where you can find shelter, that kind of thing. And then there was the warning that you're about to get bombed, get out of the street, get into a house or something, And then the third one was the all clear, no more planes. I don't know who was watching that and determined, but it was the siren sounded pretty much like the siren that we test here at Surf City on Saturday at noon.
Well,
you can kind of count on that.
That is actually a leftover air raid siren.
Is it?
But it's an American air raid siren.
Yeah, well, it sounded the same, you know what I mean? So I don't know whether there was one single manufacturer of sirens in all the opposing sides bought the same siren, who knows?
Just totally.
But it worked.
On the topic of funny sirens, there's a town called Tonasket in eastern Washington, and they have a car accident siren, which is the weirdest thing to me.
Yeah.
They have this air raid siren, and it is a World War II air raid siren, and it goes off when there's a car accident.
So what happens?
So that the emergency personnel can respond.
Oh, it calls them.
Yeah. Because it's
So
small
it
enough
calls them
town.
to a collection point, and then they go out and...
Deal with it, yeah.
How cool
It's the
is that?
strangest thing, because I heard it go off, and I'm like, it's not a specific time. What's going on? Is it a fire or flood or something? And the woman said, well, yeah, okay, we do use it for fires and tornadoes and whatnot, but it's most likely a car accident.
That was it.
Yeah.
Wow. So, those sirens, they weren't 100%.
Yeah.
Okay? So they weren't 100% accurate, because one time, I remember walking with somebody. There was somebody with me. And I think it was an adult. Now, it could have been my aunt, or could have been, I don't know, maybe a neighbor or something like this. Was walking in the street, and, the siren went off as a warning, and suddenly we were strafed by a fighter plane. And the way we were strafed, is if we were walking along on the sidewalk, there was a brick building, and suddenly the bricks, of course we heard the shooting, from, and we heard the plane because it came in some sort of a dive, or something. It was shooting at the town, and bricks flying everywhere, stuff flying, and because we were so close to the building, somebody grabbed my hand, and we're going into the middle of the street, and went across the street because they were shooting at this building. But that was it, they went away. And then they sounded the all clear. But clearly it wasn't take cover,
No.
It was the warning, So yeah, I've been shot at, and got away with it,
I was gonna say,
it's
wasn't
okay.
one of at least 2 times. So
Oh, yeah.
with a flag factory. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I survived a few things, so that's very true.
Do you want to talk about why the bicycle was left behind? You didn't talk about that.
Well, when we came to Zwickau, and the reason my dad stayed in Radom is we had hope that the Russians would actually be repelled. Okay, it was early enough to where we thought, well, the Russians. So we didn't move everything. For instance, we left all our furniture.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, maybe it was in storage, or my dad didn't bring his car. He didn't drive by car. So something happened to his car too, and he always had a car.
Yeah.
So he probably left that car in the garage. I actually forgot to ask him, what happened to your car, but I know he came by train.
Well, it's possible that the roads weren't passable.
It's quite, yeah, and plus it was a long ways to
yeah, there might not have been petrol.
But yeah, and that's the other thing. There's probably no petrol. So, let's see, did I explain that enough? So he starts sending us stuff, and then one day he sent that bicycle.
Well, I was specifically trying to talk you into talking about the circus folk.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't talk about them at all.
I didn't. We actually have a picture of these friends of my dad that were circus performers. Used to be circus performers. They grew up as circus performers. They had generations. They were of generations of circus performers. And so I remember the dad, and he had a Polish name. His name was Przybysz or something like that. And so they had no children, so I call him a dad. So the husband was a juggler and a high wire artist. He could do a number of things, that were circus related. He was also a strong man, from what I've been told, and so he was just like a general factotum in the circus. He could do all kinds of stuff. He was really good, physically very fit. His wife was a contortionist. Yeah. And then they lived, and they had with them living a dwarf who was a clown. They used, they were typically a clown, and he would do, clowny things. So the bicycle was just the right size for him, and that's why we have that picture. I couldn't ride it, but he rode it, so it was, and I tell you what, this was a sturdy bike. This was a real sturdy bike. It was a kid's bike, small wheels. And
it looks like it was solid steel.
It was really a sturdy bike, because I'm telling you, okay, while we're talking about the bike, is first of all, in Czechoslovakia, when I was riding that bike all over the place and the Russians had come, the local populace got really pissed off at me riding that bike, because that was against the law. And they would ask questions, especially the Czechs, who were happy that the Russians came, to liberate them, so to speak. The Czechs were happy that the Russians came, and they just kind of tolerated their German neighbors as, nuisance. I mean, they didn't do anything to them, what I mean? They didn't hurt us or anything. But they definitely looked down on us afterwards, because we probably looked down on them a little bit, at least some of us did, But anyway, so they, I remember they was talking to my mom, and why does this Deutschlander kid, have a bike, And the Russians tolerated my bike. All the other bikes were confiscated, okay? But they tolerated my bike because it was a little bike.
Yeah.
It was a kid's bike. However, one day the Russians came down the street and saw me on this bike. And so one of them says, hey, let me ride this bike. Or they spoke Russian, so whatever, and they were probably a little bit inebriated, and whatever. So this Russian gets on my bike, and rides on my bike and rides around. And he was a full-sized man, And I screamed my head off. I remember I screamed and screamed and screamed. So his buddies that were with him, give him back the damn bike. In Russian, I didn't hear that, but pretty soon, I know they were yelling at him, And then, he gave me my bike back, So it was, so I had that bike. I had to leave it in Swidhau. There was no room to take the bike.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was just left. But that's how I learned how to ride a bike, because when I finally wound up in Marbach, and I was at that time 6 years old, Huber and his friends, they had an adult bike, and I couldn't get over the center bar, because I was too little. But I rode it, because I rode it, underneath the bar, on the pedals. So they were kind of amazed that I could do that, because I was just a little guy, Anyway, so yeah, I got pretty good at bike riding. Then, as a semi-adult, as a half-strong teenager, I actually joined a bicycle club, which Huber's dad was the president of. And it was a bicycle acrobatic club. And I learned how to ride in tandem, and we did circles, and stood on the rear axles, did little things, it was kind of fun. So yeah, bike was huge, in my life, But my first really productive job in construction was for the purpose of buying a bike. And so one summer I made enough money, to buy a 3-speed bike, with which I toured southern Germany, ultimately. All right, so that's enough of bikes right now. Zwittau. So one day the Russians came. I don't know exactly when. The Russians came, and the German soldiers left, and the Russians came. So the first Russians were interesting people, because they came to the edge of town and set up tents. And they came on horses. And we found out that they were Cossacks. Okay? Cossacks were the greatest people. As kids, we went down there, not just me, but lots of kids went to the area where the Cossacks were, and they had animals, they had horses, they were feeding horses, and and I somehow befriended one particular horse. But these Cossacks were cool people. They didn't do anything bad to the populace. In fact, when they came into town, they would barter, for vegetables, and they had stuff, like maybe cloth, that the women could use, maybe knives, but what they had that I liked was sticky candy. Oh, they had jars of this sticky candy. So
what is sticky candy?
It was like Jolly Ranchers, okay, in different colors, without the wrapping. Okay, imagine throwing that into
time.
Throwing them into a jar. So they had sticky candy, and damn, this candy was good. It was, because we didn't really have candy. That was not on the plates. It was. If we had bread and butter and eggs, that was it. That was the food, and some vegetables. We always had vegetables, like carrots and whatever grew in the yard, onions. My mom would do the best she could, and make food.
Do the Germans have a word for Victory Garden?
Probably do, but I don't know it.
Okay. You were small.
I was small, and everybody had a garden. But it wasn't a victory garden. It was that they did that for centuries. Everybody had gardens. You grew a lot of your own food during the season and then stored it or traded it. For instance, if people had an apple orchard, they would trade apples for other vegetables and so forth. People lived well, in those areas, as long as they were left alone.
Yeah.
The government didn't interfere or somebody didn't chase them. They were fine. So, so the Cossacks, and I tell you, it was fun, especially in the evening. Once they start drinking, they would do all kinds of acrobatics. That's the first time I've seen people jump over a horse, and the things that you see in circuses, where they jump off on one side, come around to the other side, go underneath the horse. They would perform like this for themselves every evening. And so I said that I befriended one particular horse, and I don't know why, but one day we were I was home, my mom was home, and suddenly we had cobblestone streets, we hear this horse coming down the street. And the neighbors were amazed that there is a single horse, riderless, just coming down the street.
Yeah, that is weird.
It's very weird. And so, everybody ran outside the house, and the neighbors were thinking something like, do you think we can butcher that horse, because maybe we can eat it, maybe it didn't have a saddle on it, it had nothing. But I recognized it as my horse. So I ran up to that horse and hugged its neck, and the people said, oh, how do you know? Oh, this is my horse. And you know what? That horse followed me back to the Cossacks because I took it back to them.
Well, that was lucky for the town.
Yeah, because they would have not taken kindly to this,
Yeah.
So I knew where that horse was. But those good times with the Russian occupation ended quickly. Maybe they were there for a few weeks. Maybe they were there for more than a month. I can't remember exactly how long they were. It was fun. They were really great people.
Didn't they also have toys for the kids?
Yeah, they loved kids. They would give us stuff, especially sticky candy. If they saw us feed a horse or something like that, or, they couldn't speak German. It was, wow. But you can get along, with, I don't know, sign language or something, you can get along. So, and they treated us kids really well. So finally, the Cossacks packed up and they were gone. And we thought, well, so much for the Russian occupation. But boy, were we wrong. Because now the occupation forces came. Their army, I don't know how, the Cossacks must have been sent there just to kind of look things over or something like that.
Some sort of scout troops or what have you.
So then the real Russians came, the Russian soldiers came. Oh, man. So what the Russians did, and I think that was fairly common, is when the Russians occupied an area, they had 14 days of plundering rights. I remember that because it was mentioned so often.
Yeah.
14 days. Those 14 days were hell for everybody because they could do whatever they wanted. And, the words rape and pillage had real meaning. Yeah. Okay. My mom, she knew Russian because a lot of Poles knew Russian. I don't know why, but she knew Russian. And Polish is a little bit like Russian, except they don't use the Cyrillic alphabet. But my mom knew Russian, and she painted on the door sill of the door on top the Russian word for diphtheria. Typhoid. It was not diphtheria, it was typhoid. Okay.
Typhoid epidemic.
And she painted them for other people also. Okay. And the Russians knew what that was, you know. So we were actually, they never came into well, one time a Russian came in the house. And it scared the shit out of my mom.
Well, understandably so.
You know, and so because, you know, suddenly there was this person in the kitchen when we were elsewhere. And so my mom asked him in Russian, you know, what he's doing there. And I remember that I didn't understand it, but my mom told me later, you know, is that that he came in looking for garlic. And she asked him, why are you looking for garlic? And he said, because I have a toothache. So we didn't have any garlic, but my mom ran next door, you know, to the people that had gardens and things. And went and got him some garlic, and he took the garlic and left. And that was it.
Just so you know, by the way, that does indeed work.
What?
Yeah, sucking on a garlic clove when you have a mild toothache, while it's not as good as aspirin or real medication or what have you, it's better than nothing. The garlic has antiviral, antimicrobial properties, as well as it has a slight numbing effect.
And, you know, another thing that he said to my mom, he said, don't be afraid. I have a wife and children too.
Wow.
Okay. Now, so there was this, but one day, we got up in the morning, and there was this big commotion that I know. As commotions go, we found out that the Russians came into the house next door, and the woman had 3 children. They took the children and nailed their tongue to the table, and there was a baby they took out of the crib because it was crying. They threw that baby up against the wall and killed it. And they raped the woman all night. And she slit her throat in the morning. She killed herself in the morning. And so this is what neighbors found, you know, it's the dead woman and the children with their tongue on the table and a dead baby. So that was huge. That was probably the biggest atrocity that I had witnessed. Now, I didn't witness it because they didn't let me go in there and look at them.
Yeah, why would you let a kid go in? Yeah.
They didn't let us go in and look. Anyway, so...
And that's actually probably a blessing on your part, to not have to live with that imagery.
Well,
so
I'm not sure that I was untouched by it. I can't say that was...
I wouldn't say that.
But anyway, this was okay to talk about this, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
The point of this is to have as accurate of a record, and it doesn't have to be in order or anything like that. As you think of things, talk about them. Okay,
so just before the Russian occupation, my brother Heinz and I got sick. And evidently we ran really high temperatures, and they took us to the hospital.
Sure it wasn't typhoid?
No, it was not typhoid. It was diphtheria.
Oh, okay.
It was diphtheria. And so we were in a hospital room in beds next to each other. And one morning I found out that my brother Heinz had died in the middle of the night. So he couldn't make it. Now, my brother Heinz was a kid that was wise beyond his years. I can't really say wise, but smart, really smart. And I know that he was smarter than I because my mom would send him going shopping. He would go shopping.
At like 2 or 3?
Yeah, at
Wow.
3. At 3. And, yeah, you'd go shopping and he'd come back with the right stuff. She couldn't trust me. You know, I don't know what I'd do, throw the money away or who knows what, or eat the stuff on the way. I don't know what I would do, but...
It's remarkable that he could carry it, too.
Yeah, well, he made do. And this kid, I basically followed him, you know, because he was the innovator of all the great games, you know. So, and, you know, subsequently, you know, my parents talked about Heinz, you know, and how smart he was, and they told me plenty of time, you know, that I wasn't nearly as smart as he, you know.
Always a good thing to tell your kid.
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, they just spoke the truth, you know, and I had to deal with it, you know. I thought, you know, probably sometimes I was resentful, but I got along with him real well. I just followed him. He was smart, you know. So, you know, I didn't create any issues over that because, you know, if he said, let's not go there, I wouldn't go there, you know. If he said, let's do this, I would do this, you know. It all worked, you know, it kept us safe. So, but he couldn't make it through the diphtheria, and I did, you know. So, that was a tragedy. My mom cried so often over that, you know, every time that she talked about it, because, you know, while he wasn't the oldest, you know, he was the second oldest, he was certainly somebody, you know, that they probably could communicate better than with me, you know. Because as I talked in one of my earlier talks, you know, I was a bit of a handful from time to time, you know. Even then, you know, I remember, you know, that even after the Russian occupation was normalized and, you know, life went on again, the 14 days were gone. I remember finding a crate of these hand grenades, you know, the mashed potato mashers, yeah,
steel hand grenade,
and you know, I terrorized the neighborhood with those things, you know. So walking around with them, you know, oh my God, what did you, you know? Anyway, it's a good thing I didn't blow anybody up, and I didn't. They, you know, said, where'd you get that? Because I'd hid the box, you know. Oh. Where'd you get this thing, you know?
Found it.
I said, I found it. Said, are there more? I said, maybe, you know. I don't know what I said, but they got it out of me, you know, that there was a whole box of these, you know, probably contained 20 or 30 or something like that, you know.
Oh, it might have been some sort of weapons cache, yeah. You know, and then...
I found it somewhere in the... I don't remember exactly how I found it, but, you know, I carried it and hid it, you know. So,
well, I mean, again, typically...
Probably didn't have to carry it very far, you know. It was already hidden somewhat, you know.
Typically, soldiers hide weapons caches, yeah. You know.
It wasn't something I had to unbury, you know.
Yeah.
So, so another interesting thing about the Russian occupation, you know, I remember I talked about tank traps, you know, and all that. This was really interesting, you know, is so the Russian prisoners primarily built these things, right? So, so the Russians, there were very few men left, only old men. You know, because the men that could fight, you know, were in a war or in prison or who knows what. But there were older men still around. So there was mostly women and children and old men in the town. So those women, you know, I still remember them in their long skirts, you know, having to go up and dismantle that. You know, when you build these tank traps, you build them from the bottom up, right? So they had to go up on top, you know, and start dismantling it. So they made them dismantle all that. So what irony, you know, that was, you know, is that the Russian soldiers had to build them and the German civilians had to take them back apart. So, yeah, the Russian occupation. But... You know, after these 14 days and maybe a few days later, life kind of returned to okay.
Okay.
You know, so But my dad could no longer come and visit because now this was under Russian occupation, and the Czechs were in charge, and they weren't too crazy about the Germans around. You know, they were okay with the Germans that had lived there. You know, that they knew, but they weren't okay so much, you know, with people that came and you know, as refugees.
Yeah.
So my mom had to make arrangements to get us out of there, and so she did. So she arranged for us to pack up and move west, and there were still trains going west. So
Even out of the occupied territory?
yes,
Huh.
there were still trains going west, and we came west to a place in Thüringen, which is, I think they call it Thuringia in English, and came to a town called Schönstedt, which means pretty place. Schönstedt was interesting, and I think we should probably kind of cut it off very soon, because all I want to tell you about Schönstedt is that we finally made it into the American zone.
Well, you know what? That is a good place to end it for today. We're at a good time. So, dear listener, we'll see you back in part 3. And until then, see you out there.